Everybody, but in case I haven't, my name's Kate Hickey. I work over at the RAC. I work very closely with some of our campus partners, Jackie Moran, who's here today. She's the New Brunswick Title IX coordinator, and Lauren Linscott, who runs the Office of Violence Prevention. Oh my gosh.
Victim assistance.
What is happening?
I don't know.
VPVA, because that's all I have in my head. VPVA, Violence Prevention Victim Assistance. They are fantastic campus partners for us, and they're going to talk to you today about some violence prevention, intervention, and response issues here on campus and generally speaking. So I'm going to turn it over to Jackie, and then she will eventually turn it over to Lauren. And any questions that you guys have along the way, please feel free to ask.
Okay, how much time do you have?
3 hours? 1 hour.
1 hour, okay.
Yes.
Like, you know we can do this in 40 minutes if we need to, but
1 hour is a little bit.
okay! You said that out loud, right? Well, no, I joke, but this is really important. Obviously, it's a very important issue on our campus. It's particularly important for the athletics department. So we are here both so that Kate can sign off and say that we have met our NCAA compliance requirements for educating everybody, but more importantly, we're here so that you all know what to do if a student comes to you and reports that they've either been the victim of sexual assault or relationship violence or stalking, or if someone comes to you and says a friend has been, or if you overhear some types of conversations regarding this. That's why we are here to give you this information, so that you know you don't need to deal with this on your own. We're here. We're the people that you should be contacting. So we're going to do a quick overview of the law. This is going to be a quick one because I know you all don't want to sit through like a whole higher ed law class. And two, because this is something that is changing as we speak. There's new regulations that have been proposed for interpreting Title IX that likely our university-wide response to how we deal with issues regarding sexual assault is going to be changing soon. So I'm not going to harp too much on what the law says currently. We are going to spend some time talking about the Rutgers policies and how to report incidents specifically to my office and or to Kate. And then I'm going to turn things over to Lauren to talk about supporting students. Obviously, reporting obligations are very important, but the reason we do it is so that we can support our students and get them appropriate information regarding resources that we have both on campus and in the community. So Lauren's going to talk about that. And he's also going to talk a lot about prevention and intervention and what you all can do to actually get in front of the issues so that we're not just responding to incidents, but that we're actually creating an environment that helps prevent them from occurring in the first place. So Title IX is a federal law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in any educational program that receives funding from the U.S. Department of Education. So it prohibits all forms of sex discrimination, including sexual harassment and sexual violence. This extends to obviously all higher ed institutions and also K through 12 schools. And what Title IX requires is that if a school knows or reasonably should have known about an incident of sexual harassment, we have an obligation as an institution to take steps to eliminate the harassment, prevent its occurrence, and address its effects. So everything that we're going to talk about today in terms of reporting and how we respond is aimed at those three things: eliminating harassment, preventing it from happening again, and addressing its effects. And we're talking about this in the context of students. So if there is an issue that involves one of our students, either as a victim or as an accused individual, that's when all of these policies apply. There are comparable policies that apply to staff and faculty, which I'll mention, but really what we're talking more about today is supporting students and working with our students. I'm going to briefly touch on some of these issues. I know that Kate has circulated a copy of the policy. Has everyone signed off on reading the policy?
Not this year.
Okay. Will everyone be?
Possibly.
Okay. Never mind. So we are going to go through some definitions. So when I talk about sex discrimination, that essentially is treating someone differently or unfavorably because of or on the basis of their sex. Typically, that could be verbal comments, but it's sort of the umbrella term that we use for everything that's prohibited under Title IX. Sexual harassment is a form of sex discrimination. So the way that it is currently defined is it involves unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature. that includes things like sexual advances, sexual comments, and typically, again, verbal conduct that is based on somebody's sex. When that conduct is so severe or pervasive, so if it's so severe or happens so frequently that it prohibits someone from being able to participate in their educational program, then it creates what we call a hostile environment. So that's when the university is obligated to make sure that we're responding to stop that situation from happening, address its effects, and prevent it from happening again. When I say educational program, that doesn't just mean in the classroom. It means if a student cannot feel comfortable living in their residence hall, if they don't feel comfortable going to the dining hall, if they don't feel comfortable at a team practice, or don't feel comfortable in a particular building, all of that is connected to their educational program. So our jurisdiction to respond, our jurisdiction extends to all of those issues. Sexual violence currently is defined as an extreme form of sexual harassment. So what the U.S. Department of Education has said is that one incident of sexual violence in and of itself is so severe that it automatically has that negative impact on the student's educational environment. So any act of sexual violence that's reported automatically triggers our obligation to respond. Title IX applies equally to all students, regardless of their sex, sexual orientation, gender, or gender identity, and it protects students and employees in connection with all school-related academic, educational, or extracurricular activities. This extends to programs that occur both on campus and off campus. This is particularly important for student athletes who are traveling with their team. If something happens while they are at another institution, we still have an obligation to respond to that, even though it didn't happen on our campus. So as I mentioned, there are a couple of policies that we have at the university that address our obligations to respond. The one that we're going to focus on the most is the second bullet point, the student policy prohibiting sexual harassment, sexual violence, relationship violence, stalking, and related misconduct. A lot of the law regarding Title IX has to do with sex discrimination and sexual harassment. There is another law called the Violence Against Women Act, which extends our obligations for responding to sexual assault to incidents of relationship violence and stalking. So even though those things might not necessarily be sexual in nature, we do have the same obligations to respond, and to respond in the same way, and to make sure that we're supporting our students in the same way. So we do treat all of those incidents equally under our policy. There is a comparable policy, as I mentioned, for staff and faculty and third parties. So if we are aware of an incident that happens on where one of our students is possibly assaulted or is in an abusive relationship with someone who is affiliated with the university but not necessarily a staff member, we still have an obligation to respond to that as well. I'm trying to think of some of the contexts where that has come up with affiliates. Someone who's a contractor, or actually a student, the most obvious one is a student visitor. If somebody is coming to our campus as a guest of another student and they assault one of our students, we still have an obligation to respond to that. And on the flip side of that, if we have if there is somebody visiting campus, for example, a recruit, if they're on campus and they go to a party and they allege that they were assaulted by one of our students, we again have an obligation to respond. So even though the victim is not one of our students, we have an obligation to respond to that report as well. The student policy is very closely connected to our student code of conduct, so that obviously applies to all students on campus. It addresses a number of forms of misconduct, but our office works very closely with the Office of Student Conduct so that if a student is found to have violated our policy, the Conduct Office then brings them through the adjudication process. So as I mentioned, the policy addresses a number of different issues. Sexual harassment, which we talked about a little, gender-based harassment. So this would be unwelcome conduct that is based on somebody's gender or gender identity. It might not be sexual, but it still is based on their gender. That's prohibited under our policy. I'm not going to go through all of these. The biggest issues that we're seeing on campus right now involve sexual exploitation, sexual assault, and relationship violence. The most common example of sexual exploitation that we've been seeing involves photos or videos, where a student takes a photo of somebody either during some sort of sexual interaction, usually it's photos or videos of someone in a sexual interaction. Maybe taking that photo or video was consensual, but then they share it with their friends, or they post it on Snapchat, or they put a picture up on Instagram. The most severe one that we had was a student who posted essentially revenge porn on Pornhub. Those types of situations are sexual exploitation. Even though the initial recording might have been consensual, sharing that information or exploiting the other person's sexuality for an illegitimate purpose brings it to the level of sexual exploitation. We unfortunately do see a lot of that. Social media is like the worst invention ever for our office in terms of investigations and reports. But obviously our students use it a lot. Sexual assault or non-consensual sexual contact, that covers a whole range of behavior. Things starting at the, I guess, the less severe end would be touching somebody over their clothes in some sort of intimate way. That could be a violation of our policy, all the way up to forcible rape. When we do an investigation, we obviously consider what the specific behavior was when we're discussing sanctions, but anything along that spectrum could be considered sexual assault. The other issue that we have seen a lot of, unfortunately, is relationship violence. Again, it doesn't necessarily involve something sexual, but there is, if we see physical abuse or psychological abuse, that is something that could be reported as relationship violence. It's something that our offices are working on a lot with students and education on healthy relationships and how to communicate with one another. But we have seen a large uptick in the number of relationship violence reports. Kate loved when I put this up. I didn't tell her I was putting a picture of her in my PowerPoint. But when it comes to reporting incidents, the most important thing for you all to remember is that you have to report it. So regardless of who you hear it from or how you hear it, or if you're not quite sure what you heard, but you think it might be something that includes one of those, you should report it. And we've tried to make this easy. So typically the requirement is that a staff member reports to the Title IX office. Because you all have Kate here, we are comfortable saying you can either report directly to the Title IX office, which is my office, or you can report to Kate and she'll share information with me. Lauren's going to talk a little bit about sort of the implications of not reporting and why we require this. It's not unique to Rutgers, but schools do have the ability to limit the limit who is required to report. At Rutgers, we have determined that everyone within our staff, anyone who gets a paycheck from the university, including student employees, is considered quote-unquote a responsible employee. So that's the terminology under Title IX. Doesn't mean everyone else is irresponsible, but being a responsible employee essentially means that you are a mandated reporter if you know about one of these things happening. So again, you're required to report that either to me or to Kate, and I'll share information at the end about how you can get in touch with us most easily. We have an obligation as an institution to do an investigation whenever a report is made. If RUPD is doing an investigation, or the Piscataway Police or New Brunswick Police, that is separate from what the institution is required to do. So you could report something to the police, but the obligation is to actually report it to the university. What we recommend is not reporting to the police unless, number one, there's an emergency that needs to be dealt with right now. Obviously call 911, don't call me, don't call Kate, call 911. But what we prefer is for you to call us, and then we will figure out whether or not the police should be contacted. The reason for that is a lot of the reports that we get are delayed. So it's not someone saying I was assaulted an hour ago, or even I was assaulted yesterday. It's typically they've been assaulted sometime in the past, and now they are reporting it to the university. We want to make sure that that person who is reporting feels empowered to decide when they want to contact the police, if they want to go to law enforcement, and when they do that. And then if they do want to report to the police, we want to make sure that they have an advocate with them, which is someone from Lauren's office who can help them through that process. So our preference is to always, let us know what's going on, and then we can talk through whether or not the police need to be contacted as well. I share information very openly with RUPD. They share information with me as well. So often if a student goes to the police first, RUPD will then share that report with my office. And then if I get a report and we know that the victim wants to move forward with law enforcement, we will then share that information with the police as well. I talked a little bit about responsible employees. Again, this is the definition. As this is a responsible employee as defined by Title IX, is someone who has the authority to take action to address an incident of sexual violence, or someone who's been given that authority by their university, which is you all. Our policy does state that every employee is a responsible employee, or someone that a student reasonably believes has the authority to report, to address an incident. So this is where I think things get a little bit fuzzy. A student might think that by going to their coach or their assistant coach or their trainer that that person has the ability to actually help them through this situation. This is why we've defined that everybody is a responsible employee, so that students don't have to try to figure that out, and so that you all don't have to try to figure that piece out. When we talk about reporting, we're going to ask that you report all information that you have. So anything that the reporting person has told you, we want shared with us. So that could include, obviously, the reporting party's name, the name of the accused individual, any witnesses, and any relevant facts that they may have shared with you. This doesn't mean that you should do your own investigation. Quite the opposite. We don't want you to do your own investigation. You don't want to be doing your own investigation. The less information you know, the better for you. But anything that you do know, we want you to pass along to us. So we're going to ask you to report any information that you have, and to only share information internally with those who need to know. So again, this gets a little bit tricky sometimes in the team environment where your coach has told you, you have to tell me everything, and you're the assistant coach. Please don't. That's go to Kate. I don't know if you want to chime in on any of that, or no?
Not right now.
Okay. So yeah, if you're an assistant coach or if you're working on a team, don't go to your head coach and tell them, hey, so-and-so just reported to me that this happened. Go to Kate, and then she will determine who else within the athletics department needs to know about something that's happening, and then she'll also let my office know about it. It's okay to share information with, we say supervisors here, but with anyone above you if they need to know, but it's safest to have that conversation with Kate first. We talked a little bit about Title IX versus law enforcement. In terms of why we say that, why you should report to us and possibly to the police, there are a number of situations where something might be a violation of Title IX, or it might be a violation of our policy, but it's not necessarily a crime. So the police are not necessarily going to pursue anything. In the time that I have been at Rutgers, I've been here for a little over 5 years, we have received hundreds of reports through the Title IX office of different violations ranging from sexual harassment all the way up through forcible rape. I have not seen a single one of those cases actually go through the criminal process. Some students have reported to the police, some have gotten to the prosecutor's office, and the prosecutor's office has done an investigation, but not a single one of them has actually resulted in a complete criminal process. So the reasons for that are complicated, but my point is that the criminal process has a very different outcome and a very different purpose than the Title IX process. We're looking at whether or not a student has violated our policy, and the outcome of that might be that we want to remove that student from campus so that we can protect the overall safety of our community. Obviously, through the criminal process, the police and the prosecutor's office are looking at whether or not someone has committed a crime. So it's two very different processes and two very different outcomes. And we are obligated to make sure that we're keeping our campus safe. So that's why we have to make sure that we're doing our investigation. It could be at the same time as a police investigation, or it could be before, or it could be after. We do have a very clear amnesty provision within our policy. This is something that comes up a lot. We don't want students not to report because they're afraid that they're going to face conduct charges for drinking underage or for smoking marijuana or doing cocaine or heroin or anything else. So if a student is involved in our process and it comes out that they were using some sort of controlled substance that they should not have been, we're not going to pursue conduct charges against them. That extends both to victims and witnesses and to accused individuals. So even if an accused student is going through our process, we're not going to pursue separate conduct charges for substance abuse. The caveat, I think, here in terms of student athletes, and what we always tell our student athletes is there might be other implications through your team or through the athletics department, but there's not going to be charges through the conduct process. We talked a lot about victims and reporting and how to support victims. We obviously recognize that most of the accused individuals in our process are also our students, and they have the same rights throughout our entire process as victims. Trying to see, I don't have information in here about what our process actually looks like once a report is made, but our first step is to reach out to a victim, let them know what services are available, and to ask them if they want to participate in an investigation. If they do, we then interview them, we gather names of witnesses from them, and then we notify the accused person. When we notify them, we always let them know what their rights are. We give them a list of advisors. We have a group of trained campus advisors who specifically work with accused students through this process. And we make sure that the accused students know what assistance is available for them on campus. So we have the trained advisors. We always make sure they know about counseling services at CAPS. If it's a student athlete, we want to make sure that they know that there's additional counseling available through the athletics department. And then we also let them know that we have an Office of Student Legal Services, and that if they need any kind of academic accommodations as they're going through this process, we can help them with that as well. We are very aware that this process is difficult for accused students, just as it is difficult for victims, and we want to support them through this. We don't go in assuming that somebody is responsible for violating our policy. We go in with the assumption that we don't know what happens. We're doing an investigation so that we can gather facts and determine what happened at the end, but while we're going through that process, there's no presumption of guilt or responsibility. So that's sort of reporting. That's everything that I wanted to cover about reporting. Since I'm talking really fast, do you all have any questions about reporting obligations, how, when, where? Want me to keep going so we can stick to that 45 minutes that I mentioned? Okay, got it.
You said 40.
40, okay, 42 and a half. Obviously, reporting is incredibly important. But as I mentioned at the beginning, part of the reason we want you to report so that we can meet our compliance obligations, but we also want you to report so that we can get proper information to students about the support services that are available. Supporting a student, though, starts at the time that they come to you and they tell you what has happened. And that's it could be a very difficult conversation to have, but it's important to keep in mind that if a student is coming to you and sharing this information with you, it's because they trust you or maybe you've built up a good relationship with them. If a student is disclosing to you that they've been assaulted or that they have a friend who was assaulted, it's obviously very important to give them your undivided attention. I am incredibly guilty of walking around with my phone in front of my face constantly or having it on my desk, but put your phone down, close your laptop, make sure that you're paying attention to that person. Thank them for trusting you and for sharing this information with you. And importantly, remind them that you are mandated to report this information to the university. This is where I think it's very difficult sometimes because a student, as they're sharing this with you, they might say, I need to tell you something, please don't tell anyone. And you cannot promise that. You can promise them that you're going to keep it private, but you cannot keep it confidential. We do have a number of confidential resources on campus, and I completely forgot to ask, are there any physicians or healthcare providers here? No, okay. But any physicians or mental health counselors or healthcare providers who have confidentiality as part of their license do have confidentiality. So if a student reports to a team doctor, then that's confidential, but anybody else, it wouldn't be. I forgot to bring with me a list of the confidential resources, but I can share that with Kate and have her send it out to everybody. So it's important to let students know that you can't keep it confidential, and if they want to talk to someone who doesn't have that reporting obligation, that's the time to share that information with them. It's also important to remember that victims respond to trauma in a variety of ways. I've had students come to my office, and as they're telling me about what happens, some students are crying, which I think is the typical response that we would expect. Some are very stoic and just completely unemotional. Some get kind of nervous laughter as they're telling us what happened, but there's a whole range of ways that people respond. We always joke that, this isn't Law and Order SVU. Everyone doesn't respond the way a victim would on SVU. But just because somebody does not appear affected by what happened does not mean first that they aren't affected, and it also doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It's important to let the student or whoever it is that's disclosing to you lead the conversation. So let them share as much as they want. Again, this goes back to my point about not doing your own investigation, but don't start pressing for details if they're not comfortable or ready to share that with you. Make sure that you have the information available to provide them with referrals, either to a confidential resource, or to our office if they want to report, or to the police. We have brochures that we can hand out later on that have all that information available. So if you don't remember it, you can just hand them a brochure and we have all of that information. And most importantly, don't be afraid to ask for help. We've had a number of situations, as we've been out and talking to more and more people, they know that they can call our office if they're not sure what to do. So we've had staff members, faculty members, other students calling our office and saying, hey, someone just told me this, I don't know what to do, what should I, how can you help me? So we are completely comfortable doing that. I would much rather, if you want to call me and say, so I want to share a hypothetical with you. What if a student told me this? Do I have to report that to you? I'm completely fine having those conversations. Again, I want to err on the side of us being more careful. I'm not going to ask you for specific information unless we know that it's something that actually has to be reported. Kate and I have done that any number of times where she doesn't actually tell me what's going on, but says, hey, if a student reported this, is that something that falls under Title IX? I tell her yes or no, and if it's yes, then she shares the information. If it's no, then it just goes away. I touched on this a little bit, the difference between confidentiality and privacy. There are individuals on campus who can keep information confidential, which means they don't have to report it to the Title IX office, they don't have to report it to the police. University-wide, that includes health services, CAPS, the advocates at the Office for Violence Prevention and Victim Assistance, student legal services, and any ordained clergy who are actually acting in their capacity as a clergy member. So if it is somebody who is ordained but happens to be teaching a class and the student tells them, reports to them as a faculty member, they're still obligated to report that. But anyone who's acting in their capacity as, again, a healthcare provider, a counselor, or a clergy does have confidentiality. So that means they're not required to share anything with anyone. Privacy, again, means just sharing with those who need to know. We'll just walk through this. Am I missing anyone within athletics? Okay. Okay, Lauren, you want to talk a little bit about advocates? So these are the confidential resources. The counselors, the CAP, student health services, physicians and medical staff, clergy, student legal services, and then this top category of advocates at the Office for Violence Prevention and Victim Assistance. That's the office that Lauren heads up, so I'm going to let him talk about advocates. And then I think I'm turning things over to you to talk about prevention and victim. What?
Is that true?
Maybe. Let's do it. Go.
Could I ask you a question?
Sure.
The medical staff, is that your sports medicine trainer?
No.
Not the trainers. We actually do get a lot of reports from trainers, for obvious reasons. But yeah, they are not confidential. not going anywhere, so you can ask me at the end too.
The thing that I wanted to say about supporting students is there's a lot of weight to come forward. Someone actually musters the courage to talk to somebody. So if they come to you, just be aware of that. And often that first interaction for survivors is so important, and that's kind of the pathway to getting help and getting confidence and working on trauma healing. And I've worked with survivors long enough to also know that if that response is victim blaming or that why would you be there, what were you wearing, that sort of thing, it kind of prevents them from wanting to go forward. So just be conscious of how important that interaction is when they come forward to you. In terms of our advocates, so my office is on 3 Bartlett Street, right by the Panera. We're there 8:30 to 5, Monday through Friday. From 5 to 8:30 the next day, we have advocates on call 24/7. We're available 24/7. So at any time you can call over the weekend and those after hours and use our resources. And if those advocates feel uncomfortable answering your questions, we have backup on staff, full-time staff. So those advocates get 60 hours of training. They are well equipped to handle your questions. It's a great resource for you. Most universities don't offer that. We have a model that we're very proud of here at Rutgers in terms of how we respond to survivors. So I really want to spend the majority of time talking about prevention. I was sitting over there thinking about how to make it really applicable for you. I grew up in the sports culture, so I'm really familiar with coaches and the dynamics of going to coaches, whether it's for improving your game or maybe you have a personal issue or problem. And I was thinking, if you brought a freshman football player in here and you just brought him in, who are the coaches in this room right now? Or just shout out, so you have some football, what else? Women's basketball, volleyball,
Track and field.
Okay. Good.
Football.
Okay. So if you brought a freshman, for the sake of this room, football player, and you said, okay, we're just going to have you read the room, would they become a better football player? Probably not. So you want them to practice, you want them to watch film, you want them to hear you talk about the fundamentals of getting better. And that's the same with prevention. I can't just slap some posters up there and expect people to engage in violence prevention. That is one thing that we do, one of many things that we do, but we have to establish a culture. So I'm going to start my presentation talking about cultures that were a little bit problematic, and we're going to, as a group, kind of identify how things could have been done better. But I should start also by saying that you should be proud of being here at Rutgers when we talk about violence prevention, because think about the things that we've already done this year. So we're in the middle of educating how many 600 student athletes with our Rutgers Cares program. We have intention on doing a program called Rolling with Rejection with the football team next week, which is it's a program based on a lot of evidence that shows that when people are in the context of intimacy, whether it's sexual relationships or romantic relationships, when they're rejected, some often respond with aggression, and in some cases violence. And so it kind of occurred to me, I'm sure you all are familiar with the case, and I think it's okay to talk about it, where there was a football player that's being charged with conspired murder. And I read the details of that case very carefully, and it said he was going through a breakup and there's some other things going on. I reached out to Coach Ash to say, hey, can we do this program? This is directly related to when someone's dealing with rejection, that they can, in a toxic environment, respond with toxicity. So with support of him and his wife Doreen, we're making that happen next week. So just want to let you think about, we have to do multiple things in order for prevention to be effective. So here's the first one I'm sure you're familiar with, Joe Paterno. I want to read his quote. This is in response to Jerry Sandusky, his former assistant coach at Penn State from 1969 to 1999, who was charged with more than 50 counts of sexually abusing young boys over a 15-year period. I didn't know exactly how to handle it, and I was afraid to do something that might jeopardize what the university procedure was. So I backed away and turned it over to some other people I thought would have a little more expertise than I did. It didn't work out that way. So what's problematic? What would you do differently than what Joe Paterno did in this case?
Go to the cops.
Go to Kate.
Yes. Yes, but that's just it. Like that, you have your team, and we want you to be that comfortable. I mean, to have that quick of a response. And so, just know that we're at your fingertips. We're going to be there for you for different reasons, but you can always call my office too. We can talk through some things, how to support survivors. Call Jackie or Kate and talk about how to be. What do we do with the report? So just feel confident. We want to bolster that level of confidence so that you will call us no matter what. In this case, Joe wasn't real. Second culture, Catholic Pelagius. I don't know if you're familiar with this case. You should be. Head coach of gymnastics at Michigan State University. In response to Larry Nassar, who sexually assaulted hundreds of athletes under the guise of medical treatment and possession of 37,000 images of child pornography. The first thing she did was she provided student athletes with information about reporting to the Office of Institutional Equity. Then she brought in a Thinking of You card for the gymnast to sign for Nassar during the investigation, and then told her team that she has known Larry for many, many years, and he's an absolutely phenomenal doctor, and I do not believe that any of the allegations against him have any truth. Some obvious things wrong with that, but let's talk about it. Like, what did she do right, first of all? Did she do anything right? She gave him one resource, but when you follow that resource up with messaging that's problematic, I can tell you right now that if I'm a survivor in that room and the coach is saying, I don't believe any of these people, there's no way I'm coming forward. And so, your student athletes look up to you. They see you as mentors, leaders, and in some cases maybe parental figures. And so you're responsible for setting the tone. Don't get into, if you have a case, laying down your opinion. I would instead withhold and let the procedures and policies happen on campus. You have the power to create a culture where survivors feel comfortable coming forward, but also creating a culture where more people want to intervene. The last one, Urban Meyer. This is a case from this year. Head football coach at Ohio State University. Responsible wide receiver coach Zach Smith assaulting his wife while pregnant, and then attempted strangulation and then criminal trespassing after separation. His response was, there were so many red flags that now that I look back, and even after the fact, the things I did not know that came out, I should have acted differently. But right at the time, deep in my heart, I thought I was doing the right thing. What was problematic about this response? He did something, but he waited certainly waited a long time. What else? Does Ohio State have that?
I don't know.
So, I'm sure you all follow sports news. Urban decided to retire yesterday. I can't help but think that some of this factored into his wanting to retire, the pressure on him. Act on your instinct. He saw these red flags. You have the power again to do secondary prevention. You know something's going on. If you follow the Aaron Hernandez case when he was at Florida, you know he could have acted, he could have intervened, he could have been more intrusive as a leader. And so you have the power to stop other events and incidents from happening. All right, keeping to that 40 minutes. Kate asked me what would the top 5 things be to share with you in terms of how to do prevention. The first thing I would say is, what are your expectations of ice intervention? So how many of you have talked to your players about that? How to intervene, what to do if there's a situation related to interpersonal violence? Anybody? Does anybody talk to their players about that?
We haven't talked about it directly. I'm a golf coach, just for clarification.
What's that?
I'm a golf coach, just
Okay, thank you.
football, but no, you don't know football. But we talk a lot about doing the right things, and we haven't narrowed down the specific cases that maybe you're referring to in the bystander situation, but we certainly talk about being good men and being able to act with leadership situations and act, not take it as deep.
Okay. Well, and I think that's okay, as long as you make it applicable to life's situations that we're going to put in. Anybody else? So I think the first step for all of you is to establish what your expectations are. Have those conversations. And if you feel like they don't know how to intervene, you can certainly work with my office. We come in, we do bystander intervention training for you. Or I can just email you some tips and to like take the conversation that you've already had and make it applicable to intervening in situations of interpersonal violence. The second is conduct guided discussions. I can't tell you how much students want to talk about this stuff. We did a campus-wide survey last year, and overwhelmingly they told us they want to learn more. They want to have these conversations. And it goes beyond just that checking the box. 2 weeks ago, I had a program called Tacos and Talking. 100 guys, interfraternity council chapter members, they each brought 3 guys each. We just sat down and we talked about masculinity, the good, the bad, things that are tough. We talked about consent. These are ways that you can kind of get people to drop their defensiveness and have these very difficult conversations about a sensitive topic. So I encourage you to have these conversations. And if you don't feel comfortable, we have a whole battery of different presentations that we can bring into your teams. But I guarantee that if you just opened a window and gave them a platform to talk, they would want to do so. Visual display in your spaces. So obviously really good at creating mantras, sayings, slogans. We do the same thing all over campus with our stuff. And it would be, I think, a show of commitment to doing violence prevention work if we work together and we can get you some of our posters into your spaces. That's just one way of doing things. We also have, we ordered 2,000 red t-shirts, I Prevent, I Support, I Speak, through the Rutgers Cares program, which every one of your athletes should be going through. They're going to get that t-shirt. So that messaging will be on campus. And get creative. I mean, I'm not the most creative person in the world, but I have very creative people that work for me and with me. And so together we can figure out how can we make the space look like we're committed to this issue. My biggest dream, and I hope that I'm not, it's not too high in the sky, but for you all to attend an event as a team. So we have the Clothesline Project on April 11th. That's just one thing that I'm trying to promote. We usually have about 1,000 people there. We set out t-shirts that are displays of incidents that students themselves have gone through as survivors, and it takes up all of Voorhees Mall. And I've been promoting at each one of these things to bring your whole team. Bring your whole team. We will be there the entire day, 9 to 5, and just show support. One, I think it will raise your team members' survivor empathy, but it also shows the other people that are on this campus how much you care about this issue. And I know that student athletes may not want that moniker of a role model. They are. They have status, and when they show themselves and show their presence at events like the ones that we do, it goes a long way. And the last thing, I would encourage you to spearhead your own event. You don't have to come to ours, do your own thing. We know that fraternities and sororities have worked with us closely to say, hey, we're thinking about doing this event. Can you walk us through it? We help them do it in a very sensitive manner because things can go awry quickly. So, for example, one of the fraternities wanted to do a walk a mile in their shoes last year, which they ended up doing, but it's guys getting in high-heeled shoes and doing a walk around campus. Now that can quickly turn into thinking like, oh, this is men dressing in drag and it's a joke and it's funny. So we set up different messaging and had a kind of a heartfelt conversation with those that attended in the beginning to tell those that attended, this is what this is about. This is what we're trying to accomplish today. So I would encourage you and challenge you to think about events that you can do, that you can spearhead, that we can help support. Thank you for having me.
All right, contact info for Jackie's office here. You can send us an updated. We have some staff changes there, and then for any staff-related or third-party related folks, those reports go to Lisa Grosskreutz, and then our contact over in Ethics and Compliance as it relates to Title IX is Judy Ryan. She's the main Title IX officer on campus. Jackie is our Title IX coordinator here on New Brunswick. So any of these issues that we talked about today, Jackie talked about today, that Lauren talked about, they again get reported to myself or to Jackie. And I think the really couple important messages to take away today is one, we have phenomenal campus partners that we work with every week, every month to educate, to deal with incidents as they come up, because unfortunately we do have incidents that come up, and they're fantastic to work with. Jackie talked about the treatment of people who report issues and then people who are accused of issues, and what we found is exactly what she says has come forth to be true in terms of how people who are accused are treated in our system is not how people are treated in some of the systems that you read about in some of the articles we've seen across the country, incidents that have happened across the country. So we have a great system here, and probably the most important thing though that we can take away is that any incidents that come across your desk, that you learn about, that someone tells you about, you need to make sure you report them. You need to make sure that you're not doing your own investigation on them. You need to make sure that those come directly to either myself or Jackie. And believe me, I will not be offended if you are not comfortable reporting a situation to me. That is not a problem. Jackie is your girl. She will take that report. She will deal with that situation. I will eventually find out the situation. If I need to, she will determine that. And if I report a situation to her, she's going to determine who else might need to know about it. She tells me. We don't make that determination here in the athletic department. We don't decide that if I get a report from an assistant coach that we're automatically going to tell the head coach. We might not. We work together to figure that out, and usually Jackie tells me, or RUPD if they're involved, tells me who we can let know and who we can bring into the room. So just really important that you know who to go to if you have questions and issues. Are there any questions right now that you have?